So, a little quick backstory. I grew up in Providence, a city that everyone knows is a very busy and noisy place all day long. They go to buses, to traffic, to business, but at night it is very quiet, sometimes even very light. This story is about something that happened to me when I was 15 years old, and I got my first job at McDonald's. I was 15 years old, and I was recruited from my hometown. It was great, because I could go to work without worrying about my parents having to travel, and I got to know my young children while working there. Unfortunately, they weren't the greatest of friends. They were very rebellious. They would clown around at work, disrespect customers, 90s type punks if you catch my drift. Slowly, I became like them. I started to respect my parents, which wasn't like me at all. But I didn't always have a lot of friends. Because of that I wanted to fit in. On a side note, I was very sheltered growing up. I didn't really go out much because my parents were very protective of me. But anyway, one night around 10 p.m., I finished watching Monday Night Raw and went downstairs to get something to eat. I opened the fridge and heard my father's footsteps. He wore a hard hat on the tile floor. "Chris, I asked you to take out the trash all day. They're coming tomorrow. Do it now." Now normally he would have asked me the first time, but now I'm old, and having become a little wiser, it shouldn't be my responsibility anymore. "I'm working and going to school right now, and you make it out," I replied. My dad's eyes widened because I'd never talked to him like that before. He leaned over and said softly, "If you live here, you will help. Now take out the trash or leave." I called her dirty. Not only did I take out the trash, but I was upstaged like a dumb teenager. "Good, I'm leaving. Are you going to kick me out for this? Don't bother looking for me." "I lived in this stupid house," I said. I opened the door and locked it. I went to McDonald's to see if I had any friends or not. Just a guy who had just finished cleaning. And of course it rained all night, so we had to go and find somewhere to stay dry. There was an overpass across the street that I knew, so I started walking towards it. I regret what I did, and I wish I had taken out the stupid trash. But eventually I reached the bridge and climbed up the hill to a small section around the corner. I remember learning to go here in case of a tornado in school, so I knew it was safe. I waited patiently and stubbornly for my parents to call the police, which in my mind would show that they cared. An hour passes, and nothing. There were no sirens or cars on the road. It was very cold, but I vowed not to give up. I crossed my arms over my legs, and eventually I must have fallen asleep. But then, I woke up half crying across the bridge on his horn. I looked all confused. How long did I last? I looked at McDonald's and saw an old man in a gray suit sitting at the bus stop. That was weird, too. He sat quietly, facing forward. I figured it must be like 5 a.m. from waiting for the bus at this point. So I got up, very disappointed that my parents didn't try to find me, and started walking to the bus stop. Now I'm a pretty good person, and I trust my gut, and the closer I got to this old guy, the more negative I got when I got close to him. He slowly turned his head and looked at me and smiled. Not a shy or awkward smile, but a real calm one, I think. Instead of smiling and going home, I thought maybe I'd go to this guy and get some advice. I asked if I was sitting or not. He smiled again and gestured to the chair. "Is everything okay?" she said worriedly. "Yes, I ran away from home. I said that my parents don't respect me and how much I work all day." I began to tell him this story, and as time went by I saw that he became more and more anxious and his smile turned to anger. He started breathing heavily and finally cut me off and said, "You need to come back really loud now." Obviously, I was really confused by that. I thought his bus was coming soon and he wanted to tell me before he left. I was disappointed because I didn't want to hear it. Suddenly, I grabbed my hand. He held me and looked dead in my eyes. At this time, his eyes were also filled with fear, bloody and broad, and I shuddered with fear, completely off guard with the full key in his character. He trembled as if he was afraid of something. He looked down the street and then back into my eyes. "I have to go home now," he yelled at me. At this point, this guy started to scare me, so I stood up and nodded, and he let go of my hand. I was very worried and started walking back home. I thought my mom was making coffee, so my plan to sneak into the house and hide in the basement wouldn't work. I looked at my watch to see if he was going to wake up, and then I realized it was only 1:30 in the morning. My heart stopped and my throat went dry because why aren't there buses running at that bus stop at 1:30 a.m.? I turned to look at him, but when I did, he was gone. Now I'm scared and confused. I had to go home. I used the spare key to enter the house and quietly opened the door. Everyone was sleeping. I slowly opened the basement door and descended into the storage area below. I buried myself under the clothes bags so that they wouldn't find me. I thought I could sleep there, but the image of that guy kept floating in my head, and I was so relaxed with him because it didn't make sense. As I turned around and got comfortable, that's when I started hearing loud sirens. Not just one, not two, but multiple sirens every 10 seconds. I smiled, knowing that I would win. My parents called the police on me. My plan worked. Now I'm going to worry about them until tomorrow, and I'm going to regret kicking me out. I made myself a little bed and went to sleep in hiding. I woke up in the morning and heard my mother crying upstairs. I looked out the little basement window and saw daylight, so I thought I'd go upstairs and apologize at this point. I opened the basement door and walked into the kitchen. Mother sat at the dining table with her head in her arms. He immediately looked at me and gasped. He got up and ran to me and hugged me tighter than before. "I thought you were dead." He got into my jacket. I slowly pulled away and looked at her confused. "What? Why do you think so?" I asked. His next words sent chills through my body. He said a drunk driver crashed into a bus stop in front of McDonald's around 1:40 a.m. yesterday. It is believed to have been completely destroyed. I began to breathe heavily and realized that the man at the bus stop, had saved my life. If he hadn't told me to leave when he left, I would have been sitting there and they would have killed me. So many emotions went through me, I didn't know how to do it. Finally, I hugged my mom and immediately started crying. I apologized and realized I missed the old man. In fact, I almost got killed by my sheer stupidity. I left those friends, and I joined a new crowd at school at that time. From then on, whenever the trash was full, I was happy to take it out. Now I don't know who or what happened at the bus stop, but whoever you are, thank you for saving my life that night. Whether it was a lucky coincidence or a need in the right place, I know I would have been sitting on the rest of the bench if he hadn't told me to go home. The night it happened, when I was 7 years old, I lived in upstate New York with my 2 older brothers. We often went out at our friend's house. Our friend was named Ben and was about our age. One afternoon, my brother Ben and I went out for pizza and a movie. We spent most of the day there, so it was very late. It is now very dark, and we decide to go home when we see a woman standing across the street from Ben's house. We were a bit awkward, but he seemed to mind his own business for the most part. At this point, we were just about to leave, and then this lady looked at us and waved in our direction. Ben's mom always parked her car in the driveway, so we booked her around the car to hide or escape. But he kept testing us around the car, and he tried to change the direction he was running around the car to get to us. The whole time, he was laughing like a little magician, telling us how he wanted to treat us. Of course we wandered off. He only stopped when Ben's mom came out and asked what he was doing. When she heard the witch lady start chasing us, the laughing lady ran off and was never seen again. Ben's mom, she took us home that night, and we'll never forget it. A boy is stopped by police on his way home from a party in the Bronx on a cold night in 2010. He is 16 years old. The police had stopped him before, but this time, it was different. In a special 4-part series, the Generation Y podcast reveals the story of Khalif Browder, a young man accused of stealing a backpack and serving 3 years on Rikers Island without parole. He suffered regular abuse by prison staff and inmates, and spent more than 700 days in solitary confinement. 3 years later, Khalif was released and never brought to trial. This story is about the injustice of the justice system and the young lives caught in the middle. We say innocent until proven guilty. But where do we draw the line between due process and cruelty? To hear this 4-part series, follow Generation Wire wherever you get your podcasts. You can listen ad-free on Amazon Music or the Wondery app. Well, to start this off, I want to say that I am now a 28-year-old man, and this story happened to me when I was 15, and it still blows my mind. For context, when I was 15, I was a bit of a potter. I loved to smoke, so every day when I had the chance, I would get high with my friends. We'll come back to that later. But I grew up in a city in the UK that was too big for a city. We had about 100,000 residents, so that's huge. It was like an estate full of houses I used to live in. I had a best friend at the time who was a 25-minute walk from my house. But to get there, we had to go through a wooded area that led to a large lake. You would walk around him to get closer to his house. So one day I was out with a friend I mentioned by chance, and when I saw a large police presence in the area near the forest, there was also a police helicopter in the air. Curious as we were, we followed the police into the woods that separated our homes. We walked through the woods to the lake where the police and emergency personnel were. They were among the many spectators at this time. We went there and started asking people what happened. We were told that a little boy of about 7 years old had drowned in a lake near the junction. Over the next few days, police searched the lake for the boy who had been there because his friend ran to help him. But he couldn't get out. 2 or 3 days later, when he went down into the lake, the authorities found the body of a young boy, which was big news in my town. Less than 24 hours after the boy was found, the local council placed a black metal bench on the footpath, and he died with a small plaque commemorating his life. Now, the other day, I went out with my friend to where I live. We got high with some other friends we knew, and when we finished, we decided to go back to his house to sleep because my mom would have gone crazy because of us smoking. At 11 at night, we started back to his house. It was really dark now. We passed my house and eventually came out into the woods. We passed through the forest and reached the lake head. We started walking along the lakeside, along the path where the child had sunk and there was a bench. We were talking nonsense like tall teenagers when we saw a man sitting on the bench. Now I'm a little confused by this, but I still haven't said anything. It was 11 o'clock near the forest in the dark. It was scary to say the least, but when I got a little closer, I saw that this man was dressed, I don't know, something like a priest. You know, like a black jacket with a white collar. When I saw this priest, I breathed a sigh of relief because I thought he was praying or thinking of something for the child who drowned in that place 4 days ago. So when I saw this priest, I watched him sit there, and as he got closer, I said nothing to my friend next to me. But when I saw the man, we stopped talking. As we got closer, it became more and more obvious that he was a priest. Then, when we got within about 5 meters of him, he suddenly disappeared. Like gone. I had a flash and it was still gone. When we passed the bench we were sitting on, no one was there. But if he did get up, I would definitely see him. I think it's a one-way street. Anyway, when I got to the bench, I turned to my friend who was just as confused as I was. I asked him if he saw the man sitting on the bench. I didn't want to say what kind of person he was, because the way he dressed made it very clear what kind of person he was. But I asked him, "Did you see that man?" He said, "Yes, a guy dressed as a priest." When I say my heart skipped a beat, I can't explain this feeling or this situation to this day. What gets me is that I purposely asked my friend if he had seen the man, and he corrected me that he was a priest. If it had been a man, they should have stood up and gone straight ahead of us in the way we saw them, or they should have passed us. But they didn't. As we approached, this guy disappeared. This is my only paranormal experience to date, but it blows my mind every time I think about it. This happened a few weeks ago, but it scared the crap out of me, and I learned something new about my house. I got off work in the afternoon. After a few knocks, a man knocked on the door, so I answered. Although I'm not expecting anyone, I also live in the middle of Kentucky with a neighbor. In my mid-30s, a car parked on the side of the road with what looked like Down syndrome scared the crap out of me. He asked me questions about knowing anyone who lived here before, and I cut him short and said no. He asked if I was in high school, how old I was, and if I was home alone. My fiancé has 2 cars, so thankfully I wasn't alone and told him no more. But then he panicked and ran to his car. After that, I went to my neighbors and asked about the previous owners and the person. They told me there was an elderly couple with a disabled son who hanged themselves at home. This obviously blew my mind a bit. At this point, I'm actually too scared to answer my door. I mean, what did she do with the guy? And why did she feel scared when she found out my husband was home? When I was 11 years old, I went camping with my father and stepmother in a small town called Barnum, West Virginia. The park we went camping in was called the Barnum Whitewater Area. The place didn't really have a place to wash. The bathrooms were just a hole in the ground. No words to describe how evil they were. Although our cabin was nice and comfortable, it was maybe 20 meters from the river. One night we decided to leave the camp to get food, because at this time there was almost no food. So we went to get food. It was really good, but we got back to camp around 9:30 or 10 and decided to walk a bit. Well, about a quarter of the way, a torch-like girl randomly stands on the side of the road. We asked him if he was okay, and he froze. Maybe he was drunk and we finally left. When we turn around, about 7 or 8 hogs come around the corner, and you're not allowed to be in that camp, but we were like, what the heck, and went to the cabin. When we got there, we saw that the screen on the window was open, as if we were trying to get into the cabin. We were debating whether to leave and go back to our hometown, New Jersey, when a guy came up to us with the same girl he saw in the woods. He asked if we knew him because he scared her and her 2 children. He said he once tried to tear down the tent. We said no, he left and the girl followed. We decided to get out of it at this point, and he pulls into the driveway and sits on the porch as we pack up. We tell him to leave the porch, he starts crying, and then runs away. The last time we saw her, she pulled into the driveway and started calling my stepmom Mommy and my dad Daddy, and we had no idea who the girl was. I can't remember much about her, but I know she was blonde and tall. Finally, we left, but now we called the police, but they said they can't help us for 2 reasons. 1, we were gone, and 2, the police are not active after midnight. What if someone is attacked or threatened with a gun and dies or something? Of course, this shocked us a bit, but we turned around and drove the 4 hours back to New Jersey where we live and didn't get home until 4 a.m. To be honest, we're glad we didn't stay. So I live in the city, but a few hours away from the job I did last year. This is one of the activities that lead a tourist nature tour. Employee housing is in one place in Appalachia. I went back to work for spring break. Note that since I mentioned Appalachia, it's not a horror story. I think it's a reference to an isolated place. What I experienced was real. So me and 2 friends decided to go to a dive bar 25 minutes away. We're driving this long, dark, unlit road, and it's a highway, and the busiest road you'd think for a town of maybe a few thousand people. Although the highway is in one direction, one lane is another lane. We walked down the street, and I don't know what took us, but I think a few cars flashed us, and we slowed down a bit, tired, as we headed to the right. Look, this guy's on the other side, walking, in the middle, dancing. The pitch black, as I said, is not a lighted highway, so we didn't see it until our headlights hit. He walks in the middle lane next to us and around the curve, so oncoming traffic doesn't see him. They're up to the bend, and it's on the bend, so it was really scary. My boyfriend is driving, and my girlfriend, and we're hitting on this guy. In fact, I've never been able to trust anything in my life, and all we do is turn on our headlights on incoming cars, continue to make the bend, and find a place to pull over. I'd never felt the sensation before, but we rolled down our windows and braced ourselves for the sound of the crash. The sound of something. I had never felt such a sinking feeling in my heart. I felt completely helpless, but no sound was heard. Nobody. We all look alike. So what? Do we turn around, continue at the bar, call 911? In the end, we decided to turn around, but we needed to know if the man was still on the road. As we rounded the bend, it was heading for a long stretch. There he was in the middle of the road, cars slamming on their brakes and going around him, cars with lights on, and of course we couldn't go around him because there was a car coming. The car has passed. Now we in his gaze. The car isn't moving, and it's pretty obvious that this person is homeless, on drugs or something, starting from dancing on the highway, dancing, and looking complicated and funny, looking at us. And you know when you know someone is an addict. I have never seen anything like this in drug addiction. Whatever it was terrifying. I shout to my friend, "Let's drive. He might have a gun, let's go." He said yes, he was right as you hit the accelerator, and we accelerated so fast that he jumped into the car, door handles. I missed it when I called 911, but thankfully my friends, you said something because if you hadn't, he would have come in. I immediately called 911 because this guy was a great danger to others in his life. But in the end, I don't know what it was. We turned around again and continued down the road to the drive. But there was no noise on the drive back from the drive, so I think it may have gone up. It all happened in 6 minutes, I swear. It's so fast and all this interaction happened at the same time. So it shows that you never know when life is going to happen. Everything can change in a second, honestly. I thought about it and I think it's time to tell my story. This is a story that happened to me personally, and I'm not trying to prove anything to skeptics. I just wanted to say that. You can take it or leave it for what it's worth. But those who have experienced something similar will know that it is possible. Before this encounter, I had no experience with jinns and had no idea what they were capable of. But now I'm going to tell my story. It's going to be a little long, so get comfortable. It all started when I was 13, 14 years old. I'm now 21 years old. I used to watch ghost shows for fun, but I never believed that what I saw would happen to me. I believed it was possible, but I had my doubts, I guess. One night I did something dumb. I was really interested in the existence of demons. I prayed one night, and when I finished my prayer, I asked God if demons are real. Let me have my own experience. Honestly, I don't know why on earth I asked what a dumb thing to ask. I guess I was just curious, and that's where it all started. Having said that, I really think God answered my prayer and something happened. One night after reciting this prayer, I got ready for bed. I wasn't in bed yet, just tidying up a few things in my room. I heard a woman tell me to go to bed, my love, in a really soft and soothing voice, but with an accent I've never heard before. It was as clear as day to me. Of course I turned around, but when I did, no one was there. At that moment, I had never seen anything like it, so I thought it was just because I was tired. I slept and got ready for school the next morning. When something reached my ear, my left ear, I put on my clothes and began to speak in a very loose or guttural voice, which no man or woman could do. It was speaking in a language I had never heard in my entire life, and I did not understand what was happening at that moment. I'm just frozen fear. I found out that after it was done, I was also angry with my mother, and everyone was asking me what happened. After this incident, I began to feel what I was observing. I felt it more when I was alone. It was awkward to talk about being in the same room. At certain times of the night, I always had a really creepy and scary feeling. This thing was almost the perfect opportunity to attack me. Now, one night, it was one of those uncomfortable nights, so I was lying in my bed listening to the scriptures with my headphones on, and when the thing came to my ears again, it blocked out the sound of what was playing in my ears, if it completely ruined my headset. Then he started talking in this deep, low, guttural voice, in a language I still don't understand. It shook me so much that I started shaking and I was really scared. One thing about me is that I stayed in my prayers and I always read and listened. But if I ever missed my prayer, this thing would come to me. When I missed it, it felt like my chance to come from behind. It seemed like I hated prayer. But once I got up to pray myself, I said my prayer out loud, and then the thing let out a really loud scream. This thing would also howl at night, under the stairs, almost like an animal. It was pretty scary too, let me tell you. Now I'm going to tell you about 3 recent experiences. Up to this point, it was all small things. But one night I entered my cousin's house, which was mostly full of female members. The only man was a boy no older than 7 years old. I woke up one night and everyone else was fast asleep. I could feel my thirst, so I got up and went to the toilet. I did my job and left. When I came out, I heard something laugh at me in this unnaturally deep voice and even said my name. "I can see you," almost like singing. You know, it's like in horror movies when the kids sing something creepy. It was like that, but imagine the sound of a really deep, dark demon. I quickly went back to my room in fear, thinking about what had just happened. The only thing that comforted me was that I wasn't sleeping alone in the same room that night. Not long after this experience, I went down to the cafeteria to get water at night, and again I had the feeling that something was watching me, but I ignored it. It was normal at this point, so I usually dropped it. Before going up the stairs, I looked down the hallway that led to my room. The light in the kitchen was still on, and it shed some light. Mind you, the bedroom door was wide so I could see through it. I looked up and saw a dark, tall, black figure coming out of the room. It reached the ceiling, and whatever it was very high. He was wearing what looked like a black top. I know it sounds weird, but I've seen it. I couldn't see any features on his face, but he had what appeared to be a long, black jacket that reached over his legs. It was through the living room, but the direction he was going was still the walls. I didn't know where he was going as I panicked and climbed the stairs to my room. One of the last experiences was when I fell asleep one night and woke up to a hand touching my leg. I felt fingers wrap around my ankles, feeling each finger slowly wrap around my ankles. The others were sleeping, and when I looked, there was no one there, but I sensed it. In the end, everything stopped just as it had started. I asked God to take this thing away, but it took a couple of months to a year, and to be honest, I'll never forget it, and I don't seem to be going back no matter what. After dinner, my parents were lying on the sofa as usual, scrolling through their phones while my brother and I watched TV. I encouraged her to make a fruit salad, she agreed, and we both moved into the kitchen. He would cut the fruit and bananas to the exact spot, and I would do all the hard work while I looked for berries in the fridge. From where I was standing, fridge wide, box of berries in hand, I saw someone walk out the door, and even heard the old door creak. At first I thought it was my other brother to get his clothes hanging in the hall, but as the door was locked and there was no way to get in without a key, I went into the room. The berries are still in hand, with the intention of saying hello. I'm back. I casually asked my parents if my brother was locked out, and they both said no. At this point, I finally settled down with a strawberry and saw a man dressed in black walk through the door. There was no knocking, and it wasn't even my brother. My mother also said that she heard a noise and thought it was me and my brother in the kitchen, and my father said that a dark figure would come out soon. Both of my brothers said they heard the doorbell. Our dog in the garden also started barking, but since Dad didn't want to get up and check, it would have taken him a few minutes to get up, and whoever was there would have disappeared. We started to put all the options in the head. It could have been the wind, but that meant the door would start ajar. And that's unlikely because my indoor cat would sit on the door swinging all the time, and we would notice. Also, our door is very old, and takes a lot of effort to close. Now, I don't really trust my father because he left me as the only witness. And I'm not very confident because I'm a very paranoid person. But am I hallucinating? I don't know. Also, if you have any tips on how to calm my paranoia, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you. It was 2013 and I was 12 years old. I was home alone when this happened. I was sitting at my computer, and we had one of these old corded phones at the time. Now I used to watch horror movies with my older brothers, and I hated being home alone then. So when I was home alone, I would open every door in the house to let in the sunlight, and I wouldn't be afraid of it. I was playing League of Legends on my computer when suddenly I got a call from my mom. I thought it was a little weird because he never calls me, so I decided to answer it. What happened after that, I will never understand. I answered the phone and heard my mother whisper my name in a very low voice. I froze for a few seconds. I could feel my heart pounding. I started to say Mom, but there was no answer. So after a few seconds, I ended the call and sat crying while my mom played until she got home from work. He immediately noticed my concern and asked me if something was wrong. I said to him, "Why would you call me and whisper my name and make fun of me?" Then he said, "I never invited you." We even decided to check his phone, and there were never any calls to our home phone. To this day, he swears he never invited me, but he remembers me being free. My only theory is that it was something out of the ordinary, or it was one of my brothers, even though everyone told me no. At that time, none of us knew how to hack a phone call, and frankly, I don't believe so. My grandfather was born in the late 19th century and spent his entire life as a farmer and rancher in rural Idaho. He had old cowboy stories to tell his grandchildren. Most of them were funny, some were careful, but some were just plain funny. When my grandfather was 6 years old, he, along with his older brother and a group of children from nearby farms, decided to go skiing one day. At the time, my grandparents worked as farm hands, and the family lived near Chesterfield, Idaho, which is mostly a ghost town these days. It was a bright and sunny January day in 1902, and even though the temperature was low, the sun kept things a little warmer. They tied sleds to their horses and went down the river on ice skates. Altogether, there were 8 children, and they were very excited to show off their new skates from Christmas. With my grandfather and his brother, there were 3 Robinson children, Tommy Byer and the Gooch twins. The best place to skate was near Gooch Farm. The river there was wide and shallow, so the ice was thicker and would wet their feet if they crossed it. Now the boys had been skating for 2 hours when they heard a loud scream from a willow bush on the banks of the river. Children can only watch as a giant man covered in black fur emerges from the bushes. He raised a large tree branch and shouted angrily at the children. They apparently fled to the sled, trying to ski down the riverbank. My grandfather, the youngest, was in a hurry. He couldn't get a good footing on his skates and fell backwards onto the ice. The giant now crossed the river, roaring and waving his branches. My grandfather believed that this creature would eat him. According to my grandfather, Lady Luck smiled at him that day as the ice finally gave way as the giant crossed the river. He got only his tires under the water, but he slowed down considerably as he tried to get up on the ice. This gave my grandmother's brother enough time to jump in and lace up my grandfather's skates. They skated and jumped down to the riverbank, sledding, and when they looked back, a giant man was covering the riverbank. They were not relieved. They just stood there, snapping at the kids and shaking its tree branches. The children were able to make it back to the Gooch Ranch, where they told the twins' grandfather, John, of their encounter. Word quickly spread through the small farming community, and soon a posse was formed to hunt the beast. When the children were skating, footprints almost 2 feet long were found. My grandfather's skates were found near the tracks. To the astonishment of many, both of them were bent in half like a horse. Tracks they headed west into the nearby mountains. The posse followed them as far as they could, but deep snow impeded their progress. The creature was never seen again, but the story captivated the small community and soon traveled to the Idaho wildman country. That spring, my grandparents decided to buy a farm in the Little Lost River Valley, just north of Idaho. My grandfather had many weird and wonderful tree stories, but he always said that this encounter scared him the most. If the giant hadn't broken the ice and given his brother a chance to cut the rope, he would have been killed. The story is a little old, but I think it's worth mentioning. I think I was maybe 10 or 11 years old when this happened, and I used to go to church with my sister and come back at 8 or 9 in the evening. The church was close to my house. It was on the street facing the street where I lived, and I could see it from the front door. Me, my older sister, and 3 of her friends, who are also like sisters, came back together. They lived in front of a football field, and by this field there was a small road with a big tree at the entrance. The girl's house was at the end of that road, though they can also reach across the field. When we reached the path, we stopped to talk for a while. The street was lit up, and some of the neighbors and guys at the bar were a little too close to where we were, but that wasn't a problem. But suddenly, the youngest of the sisters saw something moving in the bush under the tree, and the older sister threw a stone to see what it was. A moving object appeared, and was the strangest thing I had ever seen. I'd say it's literally the standard description of an alien, white with yellowish skin, big black eyes, big head, almost cut off mouth and nose, and it looks like it's breathing. Hard, or maybe scared or something. It should be noted that he only seemed to see her face through the bushes. Of course, we screamed in fear. The creature also looked scared and wanted to get out. He looked around fearfully and seemed restless. As we tried to approach him, he jumped out of the bush and moved like absolute lightning. We rarely saw his body. Although he was thin, his head was white. I swear it was so fast we lost it right away. The girls were no longer willing to go down the road and cross the field, which was understandable given what had happened. My sister and I returned home. It was on the same street as the field street, so close that the neighbors stopped us to ask what was going on. But we didn't answer. When we got home, we told our mom, who was the only one awake, and to our surprise, she actually believed us, and even went to see if anything was wrong. Obviously, that was not the case. Now, I don't mind if no one believes this, but to this day I know and swear by what I saw. I was 10 years old and visiting my grandparents in Spain because they had a villa. In the evenings, we would go out to the same sophisticated type of place with restaurants, bars, and activities for kids. One evening, when my two brothers and I wanted to go out to play, my family ran out of food. It wasn't far, like parents, we were told to stick together. So we're having a good time with the other kids, and I decided to go back to my family for a drink and leave my two brothers there. But when I go back, the power is gone. Outside the complex, it was evening, so it was dark, and all the music had stopped. Everyone continued to do what they were doing, but maybe the volume was a little higher because they were all exhausted across the road. Nothing was illuminated except for the faint dimness of the street lamps. Anyway, I walk from one side of the complex to the other, like a connecting alley, so there is no one around this part of the complex, and I get a sinking feeling in my chest when I see someone walking behind me. I didn't turn around and kept walking, though I could feel him getting closer to me. He just repeats the greeting and waits with an accent. I'm speeding. Thankfully, the lights are on. I'm walking so fast, I'm almost running at this point, and I reach the most populated part of the complex. I feel safer now and turn around and see the person make eye contact with me, and then put the phone to his ear. Fortunately, I pass it on to my family. I look at the man again. I'm just crazy. He probably has good intentions. But the man drops behind one of the restaurants and suddenly appears shadowy. To this day, I wonder if the lights were an opportunistic thing to go out or part of an organized crime. It happened about a year ago during the summer. It should also be remembered that the house where I lived had 1 acre of land. Where I lived was near farmland. So, I woke up at 8 a.m. on the couch in my living room and fell asleep the night before, with my mom and sister sleeping next to me. I finished last night on my laptop to watch this movie and also planned to have breakfast in my dining room. I sat at the end of the dining room table, the chair closest to the kitchen. Mind you, if I had leaned back in the chair, I could see on the far side of the kitchen the door that led out to the deck, and there was this big window at the bottom of the door, so I turned on the movie and started eating my breakfast because my dog came to me and sat next to me. I think I was about 45 minutes into the movie when my dog changed seats, now sitting under the archway leading to the kitchen, depending on who knows what. But I felt her move, and I thought nothing of it. I mean, if he was serious, he would cry like anything. Maybe about 20 minutes later, I look at my dog to see that he's still looking at something. This time I heard, I don't know, like a scraping or scraping on the kitchen floor. I screamed his name, but he didn't move, so I followed his line of sight as I passed and saw him looking out the kitchen window that led to the deck. When I was outside the window looking at something or someone through the curtains, I hit myself. I also forgot to mention that the deck has a seat under that particular window, so that's something that needs to be balanced inside the seat. She was white with a hint of pink, although she was almost blonde. He was staring at my dog on the window frame, and I was scratching the screen on the window with this horrible heavy breathing. I still remember the moment he tried to get in because he wanted to get in anyway. Although the thing was small, it seemed as if it didn't want me to see the rest of its face, just its eyes. At this point, my dog watched what was happening and did not bark. I say this because something as simple as throwing a bowl will make my dog fit. Like crazy. The sound from the TV can even scream for several minutes. So this behavior was really different from him. Now, like I said, I believed someone was trying to break in. So I ran to the sofa in the living room, woke my mom up, and brought her into the kitchen. And of course, whatever it was gone by now. If my dog hadn't seen something like me, I would have thought I was losing my mind. I looked out the other window, checked the driveway to see if anyone had driven a car or something, but nothing. Mom went out on the deck and looked around, but there was nothing but fingerprints on the window frame. We searched the whole yard and found nothing but prints. But I've been traumatized to this day, and I know that what happened there has been watching me for a long time, and I didn't even know it. And also, if it was human, it would take some time to get off the ground. Although they tried to run away, we had to catch them because the yard is too big. I don't live in this house, thankfully. I've had other weird experiences in this house, But those stories are for another day, and this one definitely takes the cake. I, a 15-year-old male, am a firm believer in ghosts and whatnot. I moved into my own house when I was 8 years old, and it felt like a normal house, but I don't know if it felt like it was before. I knew where and what it was, and everything was super familiar, even though I hadn't set foot in that house. A few months later, I also had a dream about wandering around the house. These dreams probably didn't mean anything, but every 2 nights, I would have dreams of wandering around the house, and they felt like they took hours. I never felt alone in these dreams, and when I turned my head, I would see a corner or a door frame or something staring at me. The dreams finally stopped after a while, but I don't know. I felt like I wasn't alone in the room. My dogs were barking in the corners of the house, and my sister felt something was living in her room. Surprisingly, a few years ago, there was nothing in the house. When I was 13, I thought I heard whispers when I was home alone. I've always been paranoid, so I thought it was all in my head. But then I saw shadows when no one was there. Objects like balls would spin on their own. I thought it was just the wind moving them, but the dogs came and barked at something near the ball. Other items would also be in a different location, such as a stuffed animal or a TV remote. I also sometimes heard running and footsteps, always running to my place in the house, which was strange. I would tell my family about these things, but only my older sister believed me. The things I saw never happened to him, but he sometimes felt something in his room. But one of the strangest things happened when I moved into the basement. Our basement room is the largest room in our house, and since I was the last child living in the house, my parents decided to give it to me. There is a back door that connects to the kennel, which I always keep closed because it makes me feel safe. Sometimes I go through that door to get the dog door or something. Although I lock the door most of the time, I seem to have forgotten about a dozen times. I'm getting ready for bed when I forget to lock the door. I hear this sound all the time. Note that tapping only happens when the door is opened. At first, the touch seems like an outsider, but when you get up and go in the door to check, the touch seems to come from somewhere else. When I lock the door, the touch stops immediately. I don't know if it's a reminder telling me to lock the door or something, but it definitely sets me free, that's for sure. Also keep in mind that most of these things happen when I'm always alone. This never happens to me. And if I'm with someone and I hear whispers or footsteps, no one seems to be able to hear it. I don't know if it's friendly or malicious, but he hasn't hurt anyone yet. But if he is, either he's against me because I'm the only one, or something else is going on. I know this house is brand new. Only one family lived in it, but no one who lived there died or anything. My sister says it could be the ghost of my biological father. I was adopted and she died when I was a baby, but I don't know. I don't think it was her. But if you have any thoughts on this test, any information about it would be greatly appreciated. Sometimes I think the same, I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy. So, I don't know how it happened, and 5 years later I'm still very confused about it. However, I started in private practice as a practicing healthcare provider. Our practice had installed cameras to monitor front desk activity outside the hallway for security and emergency reasons, as we are in a large metro area with a high crime rate. So, using the very famous yellow booking software that some will know, I received an appointment request. There is no insurance in the appointment request, just a name. It was JD for short. Appointments are never confirmed over the phone and have an international JD number. JD shows up, and in most cases, it's a standard visit, routine work, etc. Think of it as an unusual physicist, but not anomalous. I did the usual banter, what do you do for work, where are you from, etc. I will say that I was surprised by this person's lack of an accent. It seemed pretty standard for the area, but it wasn't what they said they were from. There were no distinguishing marks or characteristics except human height, which was above the average for each sex. But the appointment ends, and they pay in cash and do nothing. The standard is not to call me, I'll call you something. Although the day was very busy, I didn't manage to do one or the other note at the time, so at the end of the day I sat down to make my notes and noticed that JD was not in the note at all, so there was one. The patient disappears, so I checked the system, maybe FD, I don't know, seems to have been forgotten because it's cashier. They're not like smaller practices because they don't have to be sent to insurance companies for coverage, but when I checked, the appointment was not there. So I decided to check the booking app to pull up their info, but there was no appointment either. So I asked the front desk what was going on, and they said they didn't know what or who I was contacting. Now, we saw over 50 people that day, so I let it slide. I made a note but didn't add any information other than what the patient said, and I remembered the international number but couldn't remember the code. But fast forward 2 or 3 days later, I was still thinking about the situation and remembered the cameras. So I asked the front desk to watch the video with me. I should have known I was crazy. To my surprise, there, clear as day, the patient is talking to me in the hallway and checking in with the FD, and the FD records the transaction on both the cash register and the digital account. Needless to say, all three of us were very confused by this. As the youth usually do, the FD was a bit of a cover-up. No one wrote anything they thought was their name. We called the booking company, and no one was booked for that day, at least not under my profile. So how did the appointment disappear from both our EHR and our all-in-one booking software? I'm still puzzled by the commenters. I mean, is this a glitch or something weird? It was a while ago now, but I've heard a lot of stories here. Hey always makes me think of this meeting because I think they are so similar. A friend and I, then a 22-year-old woman, visited Outland in San Francisco in 2021. This event was not overseas, but my Airbnb friend and I stayed in Auckland. I'm originally from California, and I know Oakland can be a little lonely at times, but as we approached getting our tickets and plans together, there were very few places to stay this weekend. The neighborhood and location in general seemed nice enough, to be honest, maybe. Neither of us lived in California at the time, but we enjoyed traveling and road trips, so we decided to go to the festival. Not only do I have out-of-state plates, but I feel like my car gives off a potential solo female traveler vibe at the time. I then worked on toning it down a bit as I traveled, so it would be a little more vague. But after the second night of the festival, my friend and I got back to the Airbnb very late, around 1 a.m., and I couldn't sleep. I decided to smoke and call my boyfriend and call whatnot. I sat in my car for maybe 5 minutes when I saw a car pull up and stop behind my car. It was all street parking in a residential neighborhood, so at first I thought it must be a neighborhood or something. After a few more minutes, I realized that the car was still there, and no one was supposed to be going into the house or anything else. At this point, I started to feel a little uncomfortable. Luckily, I was still on the phone with my boyfriend. At first, he and I agreed that the Airbnb entrance couldn't be within 10 feet of where I was sitting in my parked car. I have to run really fast and lock the door. So I went to open the driver's door and saw the car parked behind me start to move forward, but I didn't get out of the car without getting out of the way to leave. I was instantly super uncomfortable and legitimately terrified. I had never felt it before. I also thank my lucky stars every day for this feeling, because I immediately got into my car, locked my doors, and sped away. I walked around Auckland for the next half hour trying to make sure no one was following me. Then, when I was sure I wasn't being followed, I went back to Airbnb. The car that was parked behind me earlier is now gone. I was definitely relieved. I felt safe going in and going to sleep. But I was also sad and uncomfortable because I knew that no one in the car could have had great intentions. That much was clear. I reported the situation to the Airbnb host, and I got a lesson in my car about driving alone in certain areas at night. I saw this book mentioned here in the comments, though I wanted to mention that I'm currently reading The Gift of Fear by Gavin DeBecca, which talks a lot about things like intuition, trusting your gut, and knowing when things aren't right. I was reminded of this a lot recently while reading this book, and I think the moral of the story here is to trust your gut. I am a new mom, and my daughter means the world to me. This happened when he was almost a year old. We were in the fruit or veggie sections of Fred's. It was a normal day. Some waved to him, some smiled, some sent him good words. My daughter enjoyed interacting with passers-by as usual, but out of the corner of my eye, I see a man trying to communicate with my daughter. He made a noise loud enough to get her attention, but quiet enough that I couldn't hear it. I noticed because he made some weird kissy face at her. Something about it was frightening. Usually people will communicate with him, but this is very clear to me. This guy tried to stay out of my sight while keeping his eyes off my daughter. I'd never seen anything like it before. I was alone and didn't know what to do, so I left this section of the store and tried to forget about it. Later, while checking, I saw another person. He was behind me in the check-in lane next to me, but the most amazing thing, he looked, wide-eyed, blankly at my daughter. I froze, and I remember the lady checking me out, asking if anyone was making me uncomfortable. It was hard to miss what this guy was doing, but I was so shaken I couldn't say the words. He called an escort for me, and an employee took us to the car as I scanned the line of cars looking for this guy. He parked my car, I bundled up with my daughter, and waited patiently until he locked the doors and got back inside. Maybe I was overthinking things, but I don't know. That feeling of dread is something I will never forget. And something was telling me something was wrong. So I actually had one paranormal experience, and I was 10 years old and I spent the night at my friend's. I wasn't super close with this girl, so I only spent the night once. He was my neighbor's cousin, a family friend. But still, he and his mother knew their house was about to be destroyed. The story the girl told me was that a 14-year-old boy was apparently killed on the stairs. There was a cool place on that staircase where his dog always lay, and I felt the difference in temperature as I moved my hand from one side of that staircase to the other. I tried to Google a news story or a recent one to corroborate this story, but couldn't find anything. But I also don't know how long it's been, so I may not have been looking in the right places. He also pointed out to me that when you open the door to the bedroom you go into, the cold air will come back to you, which he seemed to point out to me at the time. Another thing that was common in their homes was changing the TV channels. Even the voices of the people talking would change. While I was there, the TV channels themselves changed, but nothing with sound. I can't believe he was changing the channel with me because he didn't have the remote in his hand. But the next part was the key aspect of the whole paranormal experience that stuck with me for years. I have to say that I am 23 years old now, so the next day after spending the night there, I talked to her and her mother in the living room, and between the dining room and the living room, there was a shelf built into the wall that I sat perpendicular to. This plastic duck figurine was sitting on a shelf when suddenly it flew off the shelf and hit the wall in front of him. It honestly looked like someone had taken it off the shelf, and it certainly didn't fall off. I was totally taken aback when her mom was like, "Yes, it's a ghost," and neither of them were completely fazed by it. It should also be noted that my aunt lived in the same house before they did, and she also says that this house was abused. However, I don't remember her telling me about her experiences. I don't see her very often, but next time I want to ask her more about it. Since then, I haven't had any experiences significant enough to call it paranormal, and I wonder why not. But I've been a firm believer in the paranormal ever since that one night in that house.